The air inside the Blackwood Asylum was thick with the smell of wet concrete and something sweet like rotting fruit. It had been 30 years since the heavy iron gates were locked for the last time. The city had forgotten about the screams that used to echo from the windows. But for Mark Thorne, the memories were as fresh as a new wound. Mark was a professional urban explorer and a documentary filmmaker. He spent his life searching for ghosts in the ruins of the past. But Blackwood was different. This wasn't just another abandoned building. This was the place where his sister disappeared in 1996. He stepped through the broken glass of the main entrance. His flashlight cut through the darkness like a blade. Dust motes danced in the beam of light. The lobby was filled with overturned wheelchairs and piles of yellowed medical files. Every step he took sent a hollow echo through the empty halls. Clack, clack, clack. The sound was too loud in the absolute silence of the building. "I am back, Emily," Mark whispered. His voice was swallowed by the shadows. He walked toward the reception desk. Behind the cracked glass, he saw an old ledger. He reached out and brushed away the thick layer of dust. The pages were damp and stuck together. He carefully peeled them apart. The names of the patients were written in faded black ink. Most of them were marked with a red stamp that said discharged. But as he moved toward the end of the book, the red stamps changed. They were replaced by a single word written in shaky handwriting: lost. Mark felt a cold draft on the back of his neck. The temperature in the lobby dropped 10 degrees in a single second. He looked at his own breath. It was a white mist in the air. He turned his flashlight toward the hallway leading to the surgical wing. At the end of the corridor, he saw a flickering light. It was the white light of a modern bulb. It was the warm, orange glow of an old kerosene lamp. He began to walk toward the light. He told himself it was a reflection. He told himself it was his imagination playing tricks on him. But as he got closer, he heard a sound. It was the sound of a metal cart being pushed across a stone floor. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The sound coming from Ward 13th. Ward 13 was the place where the incurables were kept. It was a wing of the hospital that didn't exist on the official blueprints. It was a place of isolation and darkness. Mark reached the heavy wooden doors of the ward. They were covered in deep scratches, as if someone had tried to claw their way out with their bare fingernails. He pushed the doors open. The hinges groaned in protest. The smell inside was different. It smelled of ozone and old blood. His flashlight began to flicker. He tapped the side of the metal casing, but the light grew weaker. The orange glow from the kerosene lamp was gone. In its place was a thick, suffocating darkness. "Is someone there?" Mark asked. He felt his heart hammering against his ribs. A soft giggle echoed from the darkness. It was the sound of a child. It sounded exactly like Emily. "Emily? Is that you?" Mark ran toward the sound. He ignored the debris on the floor. He ignored the warnings in his head. He entered a small patient room. The walls were covered in drawings made with charcoal. There were pictures of tall men with no faces. There were pictures of eyes watching from the ceiling. And in the center of the room was a small hospital bed. The sheets were neatly folded. On the pillow sat a small teddy bear. It was the same teddy bear Mark had given Emily for her 7th birthday. He reached out to touch the toy. As his fingers brushed the worn fur, the drawings on the walls began to move. The charcoal eyes began to blink. The tall men began to step out of the brickwork. Mark tried to scream, but his voice was gone. He felt 1,000 cold hands touching his skin. They weren't trying to hurt him. They were trying to pull him into the wall. Suddenly, the hospital intercom crackled to life. A voice filled the room. It was a doctor's voice, calm and professional. "Patient Mark Thorne, your treatment is beginning now. Please lie down on the bed. Do not resist the shadows. They are here to help you forget." Mark stumbled out of the room and back into the hallway. The hospital was no longer abandoned. The walls were white and clean. The floors were polished to a mirror finish. Doctors and nurses in old-fashioned uniforms moved past him like ghosts. They didn't look at him. They didn't seem to see him. They were trapped in a loop of time, performing surgeries on patients who had been dead for decades. He saw a tall man in a blood-stained apron standing at the end of the hall. The man was holding a long, thin needle. He was Dr. Malachi, the legendary head of Ward 13. The man who was rumored to have performed experiments on the human soul. "You are late for your appointment, Mark," Malachi said. His voice echoed inside Mark's head. "Where is my sister?" Mark demanded. He pulled a heavy metal pipe from the wall to use as a weapon. "Emily is in the archive," Malachi replied. He pointed toward the basement stairs. "She is part of the collection now. She is a beautiful memory that will never fade. But she is lonely. She has been waiting for you to complete the set." Malachi began to walk toward him. Every step he took caused the floor to rot and crack. The clean hospital melted away, revealing the decay and the mold once again. Mark realized the hospital was a living organism. It fed on the memories of those who entered. It showed you what you wanted to see before it consumed you. Mark ran for the stairs. He plunged into the darkness of the basement. He could hear Malachi's laughter behind him. He could hear the sound of the metal cart following him. Squeak, squeak. He reached the archive. It was a room filled with thousands of glass jars. Each jar contained a small, glowing light. He saw a jar on the bottom shelf with a name tag. It said Emily Thorne, 1926. Inside the jar, a small blue light was flickering. It was her soul. It was her life. Mark grabbed the jar and held it to his chest. "I've got you, Emily. We are leaving." "No one leaves Blackwood," a voice whispered from the jars. Thousands of voices joined in a terrifying chorus. No one leaves the silence. Mark stood in the center of the archive, clutching Emily's jar against his chest. The glass was warm, pulsing with a faint heartbeat that he could feel against his ribs. The blue light inside flickered frantically, as if it were trying to warn him. Around him, the thousands of other jars began to glow with a sickly, pale green light. Each jar contained a fragment of a person, a captured moment, or a final breath. The voices within the glass were no longer whispering in unison. They were screaming in different languages, a chaotic storm of grief that made Mark's ears bleed. He looked at the shelf where he found Emily's soul. He noticed that the shelf to it was empty except for a new, clean jar. The name tag on it was already printed in neat, professional letters. It said Mark Thorne, 2E26. "The hospital is efficient," the voice of Dr. Malachi echoed from the shadows. "We never prepare a bed without a patient, and we never prepare a jar without a soul. You were always meant to return here, Mark. Your sister was the bait, you are the prize." Mark backed away, his boots crunching on broken glass and old bones. He turned his flashlight toward the corner of the room and saw a massive machine made of rusted iron and pulsing organic tubes. It looked like a giant mechanical heart. It was breathing. Every time the machine expanded, the walls of the basement groaned. The tubes were connected to the ceiling, spreading like veins throughout the entire building. This was the source of the hospital's life. It was a soul engine, fueled by the suffering of Ward 13. "I won't let you take me," Mark shouted, his voice cracking with terror. He swung the metal pipe at the nearest shelf, shattering dozens of jars. The glowing lights escaped, flying through the air like angry fireflies before being sucked into the organic tubes of the machine. The engine roared, a sound that combined a mechanical grind with a human scream. The floor began to shake. The shadows on the walls grew longer, stretching toward him like long, thin fingers. Mark ran for the exit, but the door had vanished. In its place was a wall of smooth, gray skin. It was warm to the touch and it was sweating. He realized with a jolt of horror that he was no longer inside a building. He was inside a stomach. The hospital had finished transforming. It was now a fully conscious predator, and he was the last meal. The gray skin on the wall began to pulse and push outward. A shape emerged from the flesh. It was a surgical table made of bone and silver. Above it, a set of rusted lights flickered existence, casting a harsh, clinical glare over the room. Mark tried to turn back, but the floor had become soft and sticky like half-dried blood. His feet were sinking. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. "It is time for your procedure." Dr. Malachi appeared from behind the skin wall. He was no longer wearing a blood-stained apron. He was wearing a suit made of human faces. Each face was frozen in an expression of eternal agony. He held a silver scalpel that was so sharp it seemed to cut the very air around it. "I am going to remove your memories, Mark," Malachi said, walking slowly toward him. "Memories are heavy, they are full of regret and pain. Without them you will be light. You will be energy. You will fit perfectly inside that small jar on the shelf." Mark felt a sudden sharp pain in his head. Images of his childhood began to flash before his eyes. He saw his mother baking bread. He saw himself playing football in the garden. He saw the day Emily went missing at the park near the asylum. But the images were changing. His mother's face was melting. The garden was turning into a graveyard. In the memory of Emily, she didn't just disappear. She turned to look at him, her eyes replaced by the electric blue light of the jar. "Stop it," Mark screamed, clutching his head. "Get out of my mind." He realized that Malachi was using the hospital's power to rewrite his past. If he forgot who he was, his soul would lose its anchor, and he would belong to the archive forever. He had to fight back with the only thing he had left, the truth. He looked down at the jar in his hands. He focused all his thoughts on Emily, not the blue light, but the real Emily, the girl who hated broccoli, the girl who always stole his socks, the girl who wanted to be an astronaut. The strength of that memory acted like a shield. The images of horror began to fade. The soft floor hardened back into concrete. Malachi hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pipe. "You cannot hold on to the past forever, boy. The silence always wins." Mark saw an opening. The machine, the giant heart engine, was reacting to his resistance. The organic tubes were turning from red to a sickly gray. His refusal to be consumed was poisoning the system. He ran toward the heart. He knew that if he could destroy the engine, he might be able to collapse the entire nightmare. But as he reached the machine, a hand reached out from the tubes. It wasn't Malachi's hand, it was smaller. It was Emily's hand. "Mark, help me." Her voice was no longer coming from the jar. It was coming from the machine itself. He looked closer and saw a face pressed against the translucent skin of one of the large tubes. It was Emily. She wasn't just soul in a jar. Her physical body had been integrated into the engine. She was the primary fuel source for Blackwood Asylum. Her suffering was what kept the lights flickering and the walls breathing. "I have to get you out," Mark whispered, his heart breaking. "If you pull her out, the hospital dies," Malachi said, standing behind him. "And if the hospital dies, everyone inside with it, including you. You will be buried under 1,000 tons of rotted brick and forgotten screams. Is her life worth yours?" Mark didn't hesitate. He raised the metal pipe and slammed it into the glass-like tube. It didn't break. He hit it again, and again. On the third strike, a small crack appeared. A spray of blue fluid hit his face. It tasted like salt. The hospital let out a roar that shook the city above. In the world of the living, people in their beds woke up, hearing a distant sound of thunder beneath their feet. In the world of Blackwood, the walls began to bleed. The ceiling started to collapse, dropping heavy chunks of plaster and rusted metal. "You fool!" Malachi screamed, his face suit beginning to tear. "You are killing us all." Mark ignored him. He put his hands into the crack of the tube and pulled with everything he had. The skin of the machine felt like wet leather. He could feel Emily's warmth on the other side. "Almost there," he grunted. Suddenly, a massive surge of blue energy exploded from the machine. Mark was thrown back against the archive shelves. Thousands of jars shattered at once. The air was filled with a blinding white light as every soul in the hospital was released at the same time. It was a beautiful, terrifying sight. It was a storm of 1,000 lives finally going home. The explosion of blue energy did not just shatter the jars. It shattered of physics inside Blackwood Asylum. As Mark lay on the floor, gasping for air, he realized that gravity had become an unstable suggestion. Dust and debris did not fall to the ground. They floated in the air, spinning in slow, hypnotic circles. The screams of the released souls had turned into a low, vibrating hum that made the very marrow of his bones ache. Mark looked at his hands. They were glowing with a faint blue light. He had been exposed to the raw essence of the engine. He wasn't sure if he was still entirely human. He looked for the tube where Emily had been trapped, but the heart engine was now a twisted wreckage of smoking metal and blackened flesh. "Emily," he shouted. His voice didn't travel through the air. It echoed inside his skull, loud and distorted. He saw a figure moving through the floating debris. It was a girl. She was small and her silk dress was now glowing with the same electric blue light as the jars. She wasn't walking. She was drifting through the air, her feet never touching the rotted concrete. It was Emily, but she looked different. Her eyes were clear, but they contained the depth of 1,000 years. "Mark," she said. Her voice was a harmony of 100 different tones. "The hospital is trying to rebuild itself. We have to go now. If we stay, the silence will wrap around us and we will become the new foundation." As she spoke, Mark noticed the walls. The gray, sweating skin was crawling back over the cracks. The rotted bricks were flying back into place, but they were being put back incorrectly. Windows were appearing on the floor. Doors were opening into solid stone. The hospital was a wounded animal trying to heal, but it was losing its mind in the process. Mark reached out and grabbed Emily's hand. Her touch was no longer freezing. It was warm, like a sunbeam in winter. Together, they began to climb through the wreckage. They didn't use the stairs. The stairs now led to a bottomless pit of black ink. They climbed through the gaps in the ceiling, moving from the basement to the surgical wing. Every floor they passed was a different nightmare. On the 3rd floor, they saw the ghosts of nurses who were now made of surgical thread, sewing the air together. On the 4th floor, the hospital beds had turned into large, wooden teeth that were chewing on the shadows. The hospital was using every last bit of its power to stop them from reaching the surface. It needed a doctor. It needed a patient. And it wouldn't let its new collection escape. As they reached Ward 13, the air became so thick with smell of copper and sulfur that Mark struggled to breathe. The hallway had stretched to an impossible length. It looked like it went on for miles, a long tunnel of white tile and flickering lights. "You are not leaving," a voice boomed from every direction. It was no longer just Malaki's voice. It was the voice of the building itself. The walls began to bend inward. The ceiling began to lower. The hospital was trying to crush them like a giant fist. Mark felt the pressure against his lungs. He felt his ribs beginning to groan under the weight of the shifting brickwork. "Hold, Mark," Emily shouted. She closed her eyes and the blue light around her expanded. She was a beacon of pure energy in a world of decay. The pressure of the walls stopped. The bricks seemed to melt when they touched her light. But the effort was draining her. Mark could see her form becoming translucent. She was using up her soul to protect him. "You have to stop, Emily. You'll disappear," Mark cried out. "It doesn't matter," she replied, her voice sounding like a fading radio signal. "I've been here for 30 years. I am part of this place. But you have a life to live. You have to tell the world. You have to make sure no one ever opens these gates again." They reached the lobby. The main entrance was blocked by a mountain of rotted wheelchairs and rusted medical equipment. Mark grabbed the metal pipe and began to dig. He threw aside broken wheels and metal frames. He worked until his hands were bleeding and his muscles were screaming in pain. Behind them, Dr. Malachi appeared one last time. He was no longer human at all. He was a towering shadow made of discarded bandages and broken glass. He had no face, only a gaping hole where his mouth should be. He reached out a long, jagged arm to grab Mark's shoulder. "The archive is never full, Mark," the shadow hissed. "There is always room for one more." Mark didn't look back. He found a gap in the debris. He saw the moonlight outside. He saw the cold, gray sky of the real world. He pushed Emily toward the gap. "Go, Emily, run." "I can't go out there, Mark," she said, looking at the moonlight with a sad smile. "I don't have a body anymore. I belong to the light now. But I will always be with you." She pushed him through the gap. Mark felt himself falling. He hit the wet grass of the asylum grounds and rolled down the hill. He looked back at the building. The Blackwood Asylum was no longer a building. It was a massive, pulsing mound of darkness. With a final, soul-piercing scream, the entire structure collapsed inward. It didn't fall down. It fell into itself, disappearing into the void where Room 0 and Ward 13 once existed. In a matter of seconds, the hill was empty. Only a massive, scorched circle remained on the earth. No bricks, no glass, no bodies. Mark lay on the grass, gasping for air. The silence of the night was now absolute. There were no crickets, there was no wind, just the sound of his own heart. He reached into his pocket and found a small object. It was the teddy bear from Room 13. It was old and dirty, but it was real. He held it tightly and began to cry. He had lost his sister again, but this time he knew she was free. The archive was gone. The souls were home. He walked toward his car, parked near the rusted gates. As he turned the key and the headlights flickered on, he saw a movement in the rearview mirror. For a split second, he saw a flash of electric blue light in the back seat. He turned around, but the seat was empty. He looked at the dashboard clock. It was 3 a.m., the same time the hospital intercom used to wake up the patients in Ward 13. Mark drove away from the hill, leaving the silence behind. But as he looked at his hands on the steering wheel, he saw that the blue glow hadn't faded. It was part of his skin now. He realized that the hospital hadn't failed to collect him. It had simply changed the way it kept its records. He was the living archive now. Every story, every scream, and every name of the lost was written inside his mind. And in the deep, dark corners of his memory, he could still hear the sound of a metal cart being pushed across a stone floor. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The silence was over. The telling had just begun.